for 30 years, teaching students from third grade up to the grad school level. He's also been a very strong proponent of bicycling, as many of you already know. He has owned and operated Wrench and Roll Collective Bike Shop in La Crosse. He's been instrumental in promoting bicycling both locally and nationally in multitude of ways. And so now I would like to invite Matthew to come forward.
Thank you, Deborah. Before I start, anybody know why a bicycle has trouble staying standing? Because it's too tired. Just so you know that that story about Buddy Pegs, that was me. When I started the bike shop, I didn't have a clue how you start a business and all that. So, but sometimes, what the heck is the next step, right? One of the more insidious forms of violence perpetrated on the under-resourced in our community is the attitude and opinion that a bicycle is a toy only used for recreation. Fellowship members, guests, our autocentric lifestyles drive our focus. Every time we pick up our car keys instead of a helmet, reinforces this stranglehold on our under-resourced neighbors. At the root of our autocentricity is this idea that philosophy that somehow came into our world as a youth, and we wanted to build a life. We wanted to get some training, get a good job, buy a car, get a home, maybe start a family, right? We're building. And then somebody comes along and says, well, we should really think about riding a bicycle or walking for transportation. And somehow in our minds, that's like, no, that's going backwards, not forwards, right? Well, I think that there is a place for everything. And part of this, and we look up and we know that it's justice, equity, and compassion. And I see that social justice as go ahead, switch. Next one. Is really a three-pronged sort of exercise, right? I mean, first we need to go about learning and unlearning things that somehow we've bumped into in our lives, and that becomes our knowledge base. And then we need to figure out what's our voice in this process. How do we help others get a voice? How are things spoken when people don't have a voice, who are silent? And then somehow find a way to engage. Take some action, right? So part of today is about getting some knowledge, thinking about our voice, and being able to think about what are some things we can do. But there's more to social justice to me, and it's about something I learned when I was young. That somehow biblically that our purpose in this world was to help bring each other home to heaven. And I look at it much more pragmatically, much more like what Marge Piercy had to say in her poem today, that it's like we're helping each other along the way to get to that place in life where we're okay. It may be that we're all on a line passing the bags when the harvest needs to come in. But it's really about helping each other along the way. It's not a competition to get there first. And so that's my philosophy and my basis for social justice as well. Now, transportation equity is a social justice move that is inspired by this concept. Now, most of you, many of you may know that I started a nonprofit called Everybody Bikes. And one of the things that starkly brought to my attention was this, the role of a bicycle. And, one of the awardees told me that this was going to take 2 to 3 hours off of their transportation a day. Now, for me, that was drastic, but it wasn't one person. There were several people. And so when you don't have access to a vehicle, that becomes more poignant. Another person said, Matthew, you're not giving me just a bicycle, you're giving me hope. Another person said to me, you know, I'm a person, I'm unsheltered, and I have body art, and I look a little disheveled, and people look at me and they see an undesirable. They see somebody who probably is a thief. But what's worse than all that is I'm invisible most of the time. You know, bicycling is a resource that's so much less and can do so much more. We have to be concerned about our planet and all of our neighbors on this planet. Equity means, in this case, that all transportation users get what they need, understanding the barriers, circumstances, and conditions. In our society, we separate the buying and purchasing, selling of bicycles, and the infrastructure. Where are you going to go when you get that bicycle? Unfortunately, our bicycle infrastructure woefully fails when it comes to meeting the needs, especially of the under-resourced. In 2012, the League of American, sorry, I keep forgetting to tell you to pass those along. In 2012, the League of American Bicyclists, which has been around for about 140 years, did a report and stated that bicycling is increasing more in communities of color than it is in white communities. Between 2001 and 2009, for African Americans, they had a gain of 100% more bicyclists. A 50% increase in Latino and Hispanic communities as compared to 22% in white communities. A gentleman in Boston states that biking is seen as like a thing that white people do for fun and black people do because they don't have a car. Just because I'm a black kid on an expensive bike, I get nervous riding past police. There are all those stereotypes about stealing bikes and stuff. Do you know that the largest population of bike commuters in our country earn less than $10,000 a year in income? Over 50% of our bike commuters who regularly bike to work earn less than $25,000 a year. This group of riders is known as an invisible cyclist. In La Crosse County, there are over 17,000 people, about the size of the population of Alaska, who are at or below the poverty level, who are our invisible cyclists. Now keep in mind that those at or about the poverty level, 40% of their household budget is tied up in transportation. That means it's at a constant push and pull with food, with medication, with housing and shelter. As you go up the ladder to middle class, that drops from 40 to 17%. So for many of us, it's not a big deal. But it is for those that don't have the cost. And keep in mind, owning a car in this country and operating a car is equal in value to the mortgage payment on a $200,000 home at 5% interest over 30 years, which is about $10,000 to $14,000 a year. So active transportation is not just a transportation issue. It's also a housing issue. Think if we could create a way that more people could bike, more people could afford a home. And keep in mind, when I said 10 to 14,000, that equates to 74 cents a mile it costs to operate a vehicle. So when you take a 100-mile trip, it actually costs you $74, not the 15 or 20 that it cost you in gas. Active transportation, according to the Safe Routes to School report on equity in transportation, is considered a white thing. People may characterize advocacy around walking and bicycling infrastructure as a manifestation of privilege, describe bicycle lanes as white lanes of gentrification, or portray walking and bicycling issues as a distraction from, or worse, competition for the real issues affecting people's lives and the resources they need. Keep in mind that transportation engineers, city planners, DOT workers are vastly predominantly white and do not ride bikes, by the way. So go on to the next one. And the next. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about not creating a whole nother bike map for bicyclists. But keep in mind that it's a continuum. So when we create a pathway that's off the street, and this is a continuum, so it keeps going down. So the idea is that we're trying to encourage people, A, to get out on their bicycle, but second, as we look at it for transportation, these routes don't take us where we need to go very often. We need to move down that. So then we get to bike lanes. We have a buffered bike lane that we just put in on 2nd Street. Those are a real means to help us to gain our confidence that we can bike where we need to go, not just get out and ride a bike for recreation. So when we talk about infrastructure, there are different ways that we meet, but it's really about helping us gain some confidence in where we can go. So the bicycle's not a transportation solution only, as I mentioned. It's economic, a health solution, an environmental solution. And recently, advocacy have been talking about intersectionality. In other words, the intersection of all the facets of our lives that are affected by transportation. Columbia University study, and this is the health aspect of it, it's just kind of mind-boggling, but they concluded, this is Columbia University report, the city of New York made a $10 million investment into bike pedestrian facilities, and it produced $230 million in health benefits. What that means or translates into, for every $1,300 that they invested, they were able to gain an additional year of full health life for every New York City resident over the course of their lives. The fact that cars increase sedentary activity, which for the average American is 9.5 hours a day, which, by the way, is equal medically to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day on our bodies. So we have a health crisis in some respects. We have a greater increase of diabetes due to overweight. By 2030, our state is going to have 50% of our population in the obesity category. That creates a lot of expense that we will all share. Keeping in mind that students, when they are active and can ride or walk to school, are going to be more prepared to learn. You're going to have fewer behavioral issues, and they're going to be able to accomplish more. So we talk about, you can go ahead and go to the next one. Now, let's talk about the environmental impact. If you choose to use human power instead of your vehicle, you're going to save 1 pound of CO2 from going into the atmosphere. We could have 100-pound celebrations. When I worked in the classroom, they had a thing up on the board in the office because I was going to pay off my bike and do it. It would take 7,525 miles, and they kept track of it. But every time I reached 2,000 miles, we had a 1-ton party in our classroom. So the idea, though, in what we don't realize is that 1 gallon of gas produces 20 pounds of CO2. And if you want to know the chemistry behind it, I can share with that later. But the real emphasis is 1 pound per mile. And it's about the short trips that we're talking about, not about biking to work, because In our country, we take 1.3 trillion trips a year. That's about 2,200 trips per person per year. And of that 1.3 trillion, 68% are 2 miles or less. That's over 700 billion trips that are 2 miles or less. 26% of those are 1 mile or less. That's almost 300 billion trips that we do 1 mile or less. Now keep in mind, 2 miles, the first 2 miles of our car driving gets the worst gas mileage, pollutes the most, is the hardest on our drivetrains. And how many of us can do something to get us somewhere 1 mile, right? So we're talking about trying to tackle those short trips when we talk about doing 1 pound per mile, making a choice. And that includes transit. Transit as well, you know, that they've proven that transit riders get minimum physical activity a day just getting to the bus and back. So, you know, there's good aspects to that. Go to the next slide. All right, and then the next one. Now, giving voice, how do we help? And this comes into play when we start to reflect on our own autocentricity. But the conversations, you know, right now the city's working on a new bike ped plan. The future is in our hands, and that includes some of the infrastructure. Now, keep in mind, over here on King Street, right, they put this marvelous, I love it, it's beautiful greenway part of our bike plan. It does zero to help the under-resourced. They do not have any destinations along King Street. They don't live along King Street. 7th Street is a little bit better because it does have destinations and people living on it. But under-resourced people don't know about it. They don't have a voice. They're silent. We need to help. And so when there's discussions about parking and those other things come up, we need to help make our contribution. What else can we do? Go to the next slide. Well, our children do not get the notion that transportation includes bicycling. Our school curriculum leaves that out. You got everything else that's fossilized fuels coming at them, but they don't talk about bicycling. So you can be an advocate to raise the voice to our school board and say, why don't we have bicycling as a part of our regular curriculum? Another item you can do is look at where you're at. You know, we're not trying to push guilt or shame on anybody about what we do. We're all in this boat together. But examine your own autocentricity. It's an identity issue. It's not just a physical getting on a bike. When you get on a bike, people have all kinds of attitudes and stereotypes about what you're doing. You'll be asked questions. So, you know, encourage others and as well as being more informed. Next one, bicycle parking in our town is woefully dismal. So we don't encourage anybody to get out and ride a bike because where are you going to park it? Not only that, but if we did have great parking, go to the next one. You see, it's got shelter. We can also add to the fact that it's a good place and secure, and we are doing something to fight against theft in our city. So, and we're at odds. Our autocentricity is really at odds with bike parking. Do you know that one parking space in our city to create that costs us $17,000? Us, not somebody out there, but us. Around the country, it's $22,000 to $24,000 for one parking space, one car, and most often one person. If you took some of those spots and made a really nice bike parking setup, you're talking 6 to 12 people, 6 to 12 bikes. That's less infrastructure stress. That's less traffic. That's less policing necessary, as well as lots of other good benefits. So go to the next slide. How about speaking up to our school board? How many times have you heard, oh, I would never send my child to school on a bike or walking because it's unsafe? That should be an immediate red flag that says, what are you doing about this? And to our city leaders, we should have a safe way to get our students to school, walking and bicycling. It should be a given. It should be a standard. and yet it's not. We choose to get in our car and do something different. Another item you might often hear, and I encourage you, is to avoid using Europe as a model. What works there is not going to work here, not as often as we'd like. So keeping those things in mind. Go to the next one. Keep in mind, economically, we need to get the message out to our business and civic leaders. If you create a bike lane in front of businesses, you will increase their overall sales 3 to 49% just by including bike infrastructure. It's been proven that cyclists spend more at businesses than drivers because they stop more often. All right? So did you know that a healthy neighborhood is one that has multiple options for transportation so that you have more choices to meet your needs? Our civic leaders and our business leaders need to understand that. So, and we can give voice to that. Just one other thing, briefly. I know I'm over my time. No, go ahead. Go back to that. So, for women, in 1895, Susan B. Anthony and Katie B. Stanton both made statements one in the Boston press, and they said that the bicycle was the most influential in improving women's rights. We don't hear about that in history books. As a matter of fact, they don't even teach it in women's studies at the university. And the idea that the bicycle is a change agent. And do you understand that in 1895, women wore 7 pounds of undergarments? It changed their dress code. It changed, the whole Victorian, you had to have a white face as a woman, because otherwise, if you had flushed, you were seen as a floozy. Yeah. So riding a bicycle, you were going to be flushed. So that changed. So there were all kinds of ways that it changed life, especially for women. And it's still doing it today. The bicycle is one of our best solutions for climate change. So we can see that our attitude, our autocentricity, is something that it should not be merely a toy for recreation, but a real solution. And so our bottom line is we can't afford and we cannot sustain our current autocentric culture without doing more with active transportation. So at this time, you can go to the last one. Keep going. There you go. We have a little time for conversation.